Grace is our field-led tech support in the space. And so she will be managing the chat, and she'll also be making sure that everything's kind of flowing. So doing breakout rooms, if you have any tech issues or problems, feel free to just message her directly, and she will be supporting you there. And that is sort of the context for the beginning of our space. Feel free as you're arriving to keep adding where you're located, what you do, so we can kind of get a taste for who's in the room. Excited about the mix of folks we have so far. So I want to start by just kind of orienting you all to FuelEd. So our mission is to develop emotionally intelligent educators who create relationship-driven schools. And so you can see on the right, just some amazing educators who've been through our work back when we were doing in-person programs, sort of pre-pandemic days. And really this space was created less than a year ago in light of having an opportunity from like-minded individuals to just hear from other education leaders in some ways worldwide, with folks coming in from places like London, who are putting these shared values into practice in their schools, in their classrooms, in their districts, in their organizations or nonprofits, just thinking about these values around emotional intelligence and education for leaders and how that looks, right, in a person's individual life, as well as in the communities that they occupy professionally and personally. So our mission is to kind of explain more of what we do and what this looks like in action. It has sort of three components. One is develop. And so this looks like offering trainings that create mind shift, that develop self-awareness and emotional intelligence for educators, and really offer some tools and skills around communicating empathically and genuinely with other people in ways that can be applied to adults and also to children, and that are also applicable in schools, but in the classroom, right? That whole educator support and skill building that's really essential to seeing the kind of change and development we seek in schools and for educators. Second is catalyzing folks who've been through some of those trainings like Eldridge to be able to connect with other like-minded individuals and just get more support in their own journey towards self-awareness, towards growth, and towards applying some of these tools and skills and values into their lives. And finally, amplifying. So this looks different for different kinds of people, and part of that's happening tonight, but really amplifying the learnings, the findings, the experienced change that comes with sort of being exposed to these really ancient, fundamental, powerful tools around relationships, giving folks platforms and spaces to share more of their own story, like Eldridge will be doing very soon. And so just a little heart around catalyzing, because hopefully tonight you all feel catalyzed a bit, inspired, activated in some way to take what's been offered in this space, what we've been exposed to, and to apply that in your own context, or just share how you're already using some of these relationship-focused skills and self-awareness tools to transform and impact your environment. Just to give you an idea of kind of how we design these spaces, first, it's really a space of belonging. We want you to feel like this is useful, that it's meaningful to you, that it's attuned to your experience right now. For many folks, returning possibly in person to the classroom, to a school district, to an office with the start of the school year coming up. So just being responsive and attuned and having folks in the education community really leading the conversation. This is a space to connect. We just invite you to be genuine, to really be focused on meeting people and being excited about the folks in the space who could potentially inspire you to do something different or become a collaborative partner in some area of your life going forward. And finally, it's a spot for wholeness. I think someone was saying they're in their car right now, leaving school or leaving work, trying to get home. I know some of y'all are in different time zones or with your kiddos. We invite all of that into the space. It's totally understandable that we're multifaceted. And all of that is what makes such an exciting, inclusive, beautiful space to begin with. So just encouraging and inviting that for folks who are in transition and in motion. And just to kind of go over again what the gathering will look like, what it will do. It's an opportunity to hear from one of FuelEd's alums, Eldridge, who went through our work years ago and has just continued to stay connected and really make change in his environment. That really focuses on his self-awareness journey and how making personal investments and boundary setting allowed him to become a more whole person and therefore a more whole leader. You'll also have time to connect with other folks in the space through breakout rooms to really gain insight into their experiences with this similar topic. And finally, you'll also just have a little bit more time to do some self-reflection, and that will come as we're here together. And potentially, if you decide to kind of go in a solo breakout room, to just kind of reflect on where you are in this journey and what you can apply to your own context. To give some context here on our agreements for how we engage in this intimate space together, first is just to lean in. So we ask you to be present for each other, for the learning, open up, so relax, have fun, speak your truth, and respect others' truths. And then finally, to take care. So just take care of yourself if you need to, take care both of the stories of folks who've shared with you and the sense of community and owning your impact, but also taking care of yourself if you don't want to share that much, or if you need to kind of step away for a moment, you're more than welcome to. And to give you more exact, examples of what this could look like, one would be having a place to turn on, to jot down notes and having your video turned on. Another would be, feeling free to share in the chat and really being engaged in the breakout rooms when we have that opportunity. And finally, at the end, hopefully being able to share a bit of what you reflected on in your breakout groups and what stood out to you when we have our sort of final collective share out. This is also just a reminder that it will be an 1.5 hour space, and we really encourage you to stay for the fullness of the space to get the best kind of connective networking experience, which is really essential to building the community that we all are craving and seeking tonight. And then one other note that I'll give before we sort of hop into tonight's speaker and Eldridge shares some of his story, is that you'll have the option to also go to your own breakout room. So if you, for whatever reason, are just feeling like, whoa, I'd be overwhelmed to be in a group, we really ask you to stay and instead just go into request of grace, just direct message her to be in your own breakout room so you can have that sort of solo reflection time and then come back and potentially share some of your findings. So just wanted to offer all of those things. I think we're going to admit maybe like 1 or 2 more folks in the next couple minutes, and then we will be closing out this space. And to begin, I'm excited to move it to Eldridge. So Eldridge Gilbert graduated from Brown University in 2005 and immediately began his career in education as a core member for Teach for America. He worked in Houston, Texas for 11 years, during which he worked for Yes Prep Public Schools and was the founding school director of Yes Prep North Forest, a 6th to 12th grade campus of 850 students. After leaving Houston, Eldridge worked as the managing director of schools for KIPP Bay Area Public Schools for 2 years. He currently lives in Brooklyn and serves as the chief schools officer for Coney Island Prep Schools. And he also serves as a principal success coach for the KIPP Foundation. He earned his MBA from the Jones School of Business at Rice University. So that's a little bit about Eldridge. This is just a little snapshot of all that he is as an amazing human being. His email is there as well if you want to stay connected to him after the space. And now I will hand it over to Eldridge to kind of take us through some of his journey and his story.
Thanks so much. I'm really nervous, and I apologize. About a second ago, I had to switch computers because why not? Like, Zoom is not kind to any of us, so I apologize for that. But I'm really excited to be here this evening and have an opportunity to share a little bit about my story with you all. I wanted to start off by giving a little bit of insight into like who I am and why I do this work, why I've chosen like education as my field and career, and just give you a little bit of insight into who I am as I start my story as it relates to like the fuel-led work. So the top row, I've kind of separated out a little bit to be interesting, and I hope you all will join with me on this like little first part of the journey and see this as kind of like a split screen. So the first part, the first top row are just like who I am like as a person, and I'm a brother. The top picture is of like my siblings and my parents, and very much identify as like a part of a larger group of like an immediate family. I have like a little nephew now, and so very much like have evolving in how I see myself as like a part of a family, and then that extends kind of to community. I think of myself like as a leader, and like that's a picture of me with the former president of Brown University, and I'm president of my Black Alumni Association. So I've gotten an opportunity to lead in a larger community sense over the years. And the third picture is me as like a principal. Those are my first group of kids. They started with me when they're in 6th grade, when they were itty bitty. And this is like them as juniors in high school getting ready to have, actually, this is the start of their senior year in Houston. And so, that's a big part of like who I am, is like this educator, this leader, this part of a person, a part of family and communities. And that's an important place to start, because those are parts of who I believed I was, and like who I thought of myself as before I encountered Fuel Ed, and really went through kind of a radical shift towards my like more authentic self. The second row are like the ways that I've like kind of been brought into like the work. So as a young person, I encountered the Black Panther Party, feel very attached to and like inspired and motivated by the founders of like the Black Panther Party. So Huey Newton, um, Eldridge Gilbert, Bobby Seale, and like their work done in the Black community to try to uplift and empower folks. And it's a little bit of a complicated, it's complicated. History does not always like reveal like the best parts of who people are. But I think what they stood for in terms of community uplift is a huge part of why I got into education, and is really tightly linked to this idea of social justice. And I remember joining Teach for America and after college as a way to move social justice and to be a contributor to the uplift of communities. And so those two ideas are very much related for me. The third picture is of a book called Attached, and it's all about attachment theory. And any of you who have done Fuel Ed work or been on part of like workshops and things know the foundation that is set around this idea of attachment theory. And for me, like, I think my journey kind of started with unlocking that. And so I thought of myself as like really attached in probably really positive and secure ways, like my family, to my work in the community and like a leader, and to my kids. And Fuel Ed helped me see where that might not be the full picture of all that I'm attached to and who that I am and who I am. And so as I kind of move to the bottom row before we like get into the story, I'm really excited to share like the ways in which I understand my a more authentic version of myself. And so that bottom picture is of me in Hawaii this year. After the school year ended, I decided to go on a solo trip, which I'd never done before. And I think the way that I think of myself as a part of a family, and I'm one of four in the middle, like the only boy. Like, you don't go do stuff by yourself. And I've discovered through the years following Fuel Ed that like there's more to me than that. There's like the adventurer, the person who's like willing to strike out on their own and be independent, but not in a like but in a like loving way towards other people. And so like that part of my story I'm excited to tell you about, as well as the picture of me walking through the Sahara. Like, I went to Morocco a couple of years ago for like as a part of a friend's wedding. And so I think of myself as someone who's also like, again, attached to community and love on folks and show up for folks, but has led me to, I think, do more courageous and exciting things over the last couple of years. That middle picture, though, is, I think, a great place to kind of end this slide. It's of me currently here in Brooklyn, and those are two young men who go to the elementary schools that I manage. And I would say that like before Fuel Ed, when I was living in Houston, I definitely thought of myself as like, I'm a middle school, high school person. Like, I don't really like little kids, what they need, and all that kind of stuff is like kind of beyond me. And I discovered over the years, when I've opened myself up more, that my sense of community and the people that I'm meant to serve is really a lot deeper and more broad than I thought. And is lived alongside the development of like of identities that I didn't know and wasn't really like in touch with for a very long time, especially with respect to my education leadership. And so the process of getting to like this place, like that middle picture, has really been connected to me realizing what's really important and connecting with like Black communities across the country and across the globe, really embodying a different type of social justice, and an embrace of my values, and thinking about how to incorporate more of those values into my day-to-day life and into my leadership. And so I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how Fuel Ed helped me get there. You can go to the next slide, Jasmine. So I started with this slide because I think when I joined, when my organization started with Fuel Ed, and like even before that, I would describe myself as like in a school leader haze. I don't know how many of you can resonate with this idea of like being in a haze in your life, but for me, it was very much about like feeling I'm doing like living my best life, right? Like I'm an accomplished individual. Like those are two pictures from trips I was able to take to London and to Barcelona, and my students were like graduating from high school and going on to college. And I was feeling like on some level, I'm just like the meme says, like I'm living my best life. And feeling happy on some level and really clear about what I think should satisfy me. And you know, you get into like this space, or for me, I was in a space of like always wanting more and not feeling like I've necessarily succeeded enough. And so although like I was feeling like I was doing, you know, being able to go do really cool things and seeing kids be successful, there was something missing, and there was something that I was always striving for more. And so I didn't realize, I think ultimately, like the impact of like the haze, but for me, it was like this belief that being accomplished and educated and successful meant that I meant that I should feel fulfilled and be satisfied. But knowing somewhere deep down that that wasn't completely true. And so this slide is like really about me as like school director. Like this is, I finally got into the principal role, and I was definitely, there was like a fog around who I was supposed to be, what was supposed to be making me happy, and feeling fulfilled, and like who I really was. I want to pause for a second and invite anyone to come off mute, or rather to add in the chat, like if you felt like you've been in the haze before and like what that may have looked like. It's weird because I can't see everyone. So if you would just drop anything in the chat to let me know that you're with me, what your haze has been, if that resonates with you, that would be great, because I want to feel like this is a little bit more interactive than it feels right now. So if anyone has ever felt like in a haze before, feel free to share that before we move on. Thanks, Nicole, for sharing. You might be in a haze right now. I definitely remember that feeling. Yes, the Google Meet, Zoom haze, right? Like you're at home, you should be feeling good. Like I don't have to get up and like get dressed, and yet like there's still something missing between that way of operating and like what you want to be true. So we can go to the next slide because my haze kind of continued. Yes, thank you, David and Donna, for also chiming in like that. You have an intellectual haze of feeling like, yeah, I should be there, and like you're kind of lost, right? And mine had persisted. So I was growing, right? If you can see, that's my Strength Finders results in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And from 2010 to 2015, I like grew and like adopted new strengths. Some things like stayed consistent, but like I was like getting better, right? In the middle picture, like I was asked by Brown to like march in our commencement. It's like a big deal, like a commencement marshal, like as an alum. It was like, I was super excited about it. The bottom picture is the Brotherhood Summit. So like I was finding ways to make my passion for social justice live out at Yes Prep. And so we did a retreat for all the Black men who went to Yes, and like, you know, just like a day where we came together, and I helped lead that with some other Black men in the organization. And so, you know, you're moving, right? And as for me, like that leader haze was so real. Like I just felt so busy, I'm growing, I'm accomplishing stuff, I'm getting recognized. And it felt like it should be feeding me, but it wasn't. But I knew, right? Like there's still like that, yeah, but, or like that missing piece that can feel exhausting, even in like all of the good things that are happening. And so but I couldn't see it, but I knew there was like a misalignment between like the school director, like who's getting to do all this like really cool stuff and is a district leader in a certain kind of way, and my authentic self, because there's still like, you know, something there. And I want to take this moment to like to acknowledge what I think now I see more clearly as a part of my haze. And part of it for me was like around like white supremacy culture, and this idea of like what it means to be successful in the United States is like very much colored by like a Eurocentric, Western, and like white like set of norms and values around like what you're supposed to do if you're like being like if you're winning in the United States, right? And so some of those tenets are around like perfectionism, like a sense of urgency, this quantity over quality. Progress is bigger and more, like this idea of like individualism. So those things were happening to me, and I was super invested in them. The Brotherhood Summit that you see the picture of, like the next year we added more kids and we did a sisterhood summit. So it was like Black girls and Black boys. And then the next year we did a Latino student summit, like a Latino leadership summit. And so like this baby idea that I had that was like supposed to like feed the Black men in my district grew, and like that was supposed to be good, and I was supposed to feel like excited by that. And it was, but like, you know, there's something to be said for like a really high quality program versus like everyone gets a thing that like just because we can, and like automatically if we're serving more kids, more, that means it should be successful. And instead of, I think for me, I didn't realize how like draining that was, even though it felt like the right thing to do, but like there was something draining about that process. This idea of like perfectionism, and like if I'm a good alum and if I do things right enough by like my universities, I'm gonna like get to do stuff like be called to be like a commencement marshal, and like yes, like I'm checking off all the boxes, right? I'm giving my money, I'm like donating my time, I'm trying to get like a student into Brown or whatever. In this like very individualistic way in which I was thinking through what it meant to be like a successful school year. Like I'm growing, and less, I think less centered, or like not consistently centered and focused on like how I'm growing other people. So like there are these ways in which like we have rules that we think we're supposed to abide by that had really contributed to the haze that I felt. And this idea of like misalignment. And so I think I would love it if anyone would want to join in the chat and like come on board with me. Like, did any of what I share also resonate with you? Like the idea of perfectionism driving like what we are supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. Progress is bigger and more, and like what you're doing now, even if it's good, is still not enough unless it gets bigger, right? Thank you, Nicole, for being with me. I appreciate that. Does anyone else in the chat want to share ways in which like this might resonate with you at all? And then I will pause and we can move forward. But like that's the collective haze space that I was in, and luckily Fuel Ed was something that helped me move forward from it. Thanks, Grace, for joining in. Yes, perfectionism, right? Like it is deeply ingrained, especially in education. We expect kids to be perfect. We expect ourselves to be perfect. And if they're not and we're not, then something's wrong. And that can really mess with you, because we know kids aren't perfect and we know we aren't, but we still have like these ingrained messages about what it means to be, and then like the value and worth that we have if we're not matching that ideal. You can go to the next slide, Jasmine. So for me, like, I think where I really was before I kind of, as I was being introduced to this idea of like emotional intelligence and a certain type of self-awareness, was that I was really pretty stagnant, emotionally stagnant in my journey, and undersatisfied with like all the things that were happening, all the great things that were happening in my life still like wasn't making me feel like completely fed. In the years that I was able to, 2015 when my strengths changed and when I did the Brotherhood Summit, Mary Catherine, like the idea of like being perfect for our students, especially in a special ed environment where that is just like not possible, is like what can drive us to feel like stagnant, either in like where we are or who we are, and like undersatisfied, even though we're like burning ourselves out. And I was in my 5th year as principal, and I was like looking for other opportunities and like trying to find, and not really sure what was supposed to be next, but just like, I need something else. And I had questioned, like, I'm queer, I'm a gay Black man living in Houston, Texas, like not the easiest place to be like a gay Black man. And I'm a school principal. My school's like on a rural side of Houston. Those parents, I mean, God bless them, I'm sure they love me to death, but like, I don't think we're ready for me to like have or bring a partner to work. So how much of my full identity and purpose and values and strengths was I really bringing to my day to day? And even for like thinking about fulfilling my full life, like wasn't there. Like that was all a part of the haze that I was in. Yeah, shout out to H-Town. I'm here. Aldine and North Forest are very close to each other, Mary Catherine. So we're vibing right now. I know all about Aldine HISD. So this is where I was, a space of questioning how much of myself I'm bringing to my work and to my life, how much of my full identity I was even embracing, and like this feeling of stagnation and being undersatisfied and even a little underwhelmed. You can go to the next slide. So the blessing that for me that was Fuel Ed was this idea of like self-learning. And so I want to just pause here and name that I don't think we get to claim our authentic selves of like we're not willing to go deep into some introspection around like who I am, what I value, how those things are manifesting, and like questioning whether or not that manifestation is actually like what we want to be true. And so I had to go through this process of self-learning and self-discovery, and not in like a cheesy way, but in a really like authentic way that led to me being a more emotionally intelligent and self-aware human, and better to other people, both the students and staff that like I worked with and who worked for me, but also to like my family and folks who were on who were on that first slide. So this process of self-learning really kicked off with Fuel Led. And so I wanted to share a couple of things that were a part of that on the next slide. So my favorite are these two quotes from Brene Brown. Can Jasmine, can someone come off mute and read them? Would anyone love to help me out? I'm tired of hearing my own voice. This is very awkward.
I will.
Thank you so much.
So I can just pick one?
Yeah, you got whichever one is
Okay.
resonating for you, Deborah.
Okay. Oh, I like this first one. Being our messy, imperfect, authentic selves helps create a space where others feel safe to be themselves too. Your vulnerability can be a gift to others. How badass is that?
That was an amazing reading, Deborah. Like, I love it. Thank you for coming off mute and helping me out. Yes, I love this quote, right? Like, Brene Brown gets it so right sometimes. And this idea of our vulnerability and our messiness is a gift to others is really a lesson in self-learning for me, a huge step in that direction. Can I have someone else come off mute and read the second one? It's a little bit longer, but I would really appreciate it.
I could help you out.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. It's beautiful.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
If anyone who's in the chat, please like let me know like your response. Like you can do the reaction button, like the heart, if that did not resonate with you, the thumbs down. But for me, like the idea, like these words from Brene Brown that were hugely transformational for me and really hard. So this is where Fuel Ed like was a change agent for me, because I selected to do, they called it, I think it was like coaching, but it was counseling. And my Fuel Ed counselor, like introduced me to Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And so one of the things that like helped to move me and shifted my mind was the act of like reading these books and having some really tearful conversations about vulnerability and my own messiness, that I was trying to stifle so much, like trying to be perfect, really focusing on like some of those tenets that I named earlier, was like suffocating me and suffocating my authentic self. And so through that counseling and through Fuel Ed, I was able to like really reckon with like personal identity and address the fact that I wasn't being my full self, or being completely fulfilled in all that I was accomplishing in the ways that I was like navigating my school leadership or my life outside of work. And I would like want to own this because I think as a young Black male, like there's a lot of things that like people don't encourage you to do, including cry and go to counseling. And so it was really important for me to break some molds and do this like for the first time. And it led to some crazy realizations that like I needed to invest in myself. I needed to understand who I was and redefine like this idea of wellness, and redefine for myself what sustainability is. Because if I'm stifling my messiness and my imperfections, and if I'm unwilling to like be vulnerable with myself and with others whom I love and care about, then I actually can't do this work long term. The sustainability is impossible because I'm fighting too many fires, and the internal ones that I'm fighting require the most energy, and it's like it was eating me away. And so the idea of like misalignment, this is when I started to be like, oh, I'm misaligned. Something is more than just like kind of off, it is very off. And this like kind of led me to discover more of like my passions and my purpose, and redefine like the social justice, like like what does social justice look like for me now? What does it look like in education? And that kind of led to a really powerful shift of like, I love kids, I'm always gonna be here for kids, but like my idea of social justice, my calling and with respect to social justice is really around helping adults and adults of color and women in space, in predominantly white spaces that are challenged by like the work environments that we've created. So how do I contribute to like that as a part of social justice movement and remove myself in some ways from like this very school and kid-based focus? And so while that was hard and like I cried a lot in those therapy sessions, y'all, like a lot. I wrote a lot in my copy of Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection. I see someone in the chat is like, Deborah, like you're sharing the new text. I'm actually reading her text with Tarana Burke. We are our own best thing that she wrote, like kind of like it's a series of essays written by Black authors. They talk about Black humanity and shame, which is like feeding me. Like I read half of the book this past weekend. At my sister's 40th birthday party in Jamaica. I was like, yes, for the pool and the beach, but also I need to read this book. And so it has fed me greatly. And so I say that to say like this moment was kind of the beginning of like the next chapter in my life, and like my end is a life as a principal. And it's sad to say, but it like is important for me. So on the next slide, also thank you guys for being so engaged in the chat. I love it. Is kind of the place where I started to realize like this new self, or like the other versions of myself. So through the work of Fuel Ed and like an analysis of my attachments and like this idea of vulnerability led me to like be differently aware of like my values and what values are being violated or underserved in the work that I was doing in the organization that I was doing it, in the way that I was being positioned there to do the work. It led me to really difficult conversations and a new way of operating with my family and trying to have more secure attachments versus like very anxious and or avoidant attachments, which is 100% me. And different an engagement in reading and an engagement in self-awareness activities that were pivotal for me. And so I share this knowing that like this is an ongoing process, right? Like the pandemic has also shifted and forced like a reset and a realignment of these very same things, like my relationships and the attachments that I have to people in Brooklyn and my family's like far away has been pushed to the forefront in the last 18 months, 2 years, however you start counting from March 2020, right? And questions around like, am I being fair and right by myself? Am I feeding my own ability to be a sustained full human in my work and in my life? And am I taking care of my mental health? And what do I need to stop doing to truly take care of myself? And so I want to share kind of like what things have looked like moving forward, and hopefully that it is helpful to you all, and leads you to some great conversations with one another in the next couple minutes as I wrap up. So to move forward, I really had to do a couple of things. The first of which was to clarify my values and realign to my purpose. So as I shared, it was like social justice means me working in school. And I was like, actually, no, that's not what social justice looks like for me anymore. I need to leave like the school-based role and take on some different work. And so now that has looked like me working in a district role, managing principals and coaching principals, particularly women and leaders of color, for whom surviving and thriving particularly in the charter space, but also in traditional school spaces, is really challenging. But that was a realignment of my purpose and clarification of my values that led me to make that professional change. Also, was the idea of rejecting what doesn't serve me. So and reading it get real, like actually those two things go together. As I was talking to Jasmine and Grace about this, I was reflecting on all of the being inundated in education with like, read this book. So there was Switch for a while. There was like Lean In, like there was all of these things. And I'm sure if you guys could list, you can list all of this other people were like, read this, like there's the new cutting edge thing. And as a leader, I was always like, that is not helpful to me. Those things are like not good for me, but I felt like I had to read them again, like that white supremacy culture stuff around perfectionism and like getting it all done and like in a rat race to a certain degree, really forced me into the space of feeling underserved by like the professional development that was being given to me And so moving forward from Fuel Ed in the space I'm in now, I feel much more comfortable rejecting the things that don't serve me. Yeah, like teach for like a champ. I'm like, nope, not me. I don't really believe in that. Like, I don't think that's making champions, and it's certainly not making me one. So like, I'm good on that. Not doing professional development rooted in that anymore. And like low key, like there's a little bit like racism and like some paternalistic stuff that like leads people to write those kind of books and like come up with the kind of structures and things for young Black and brown bodies. And so I feel comfortable saying that now in like this space, and rejecting that because it doesn't serve me as like a man of color trying to lead in an education space. And that has led me to read things that are differently challenging for me and to like get more real. So I'm like a big Brene Brown reader, but there are also like reread some book by Bell Hooks this year, all about love and just trying to like understand like that piece and like what she has to offer me. Actually, that's the second book by Bell Hooks that I've read like in the last couple of years. There's just a ton of other things that I needed to feed me that has like led me to be a better educator, but not necessarily about education, and recognize that we all come from different spaces and like that's okay. The other is to be vulnerable and get courageous. I'm not like super like masculine person. Like I don't think of myself that way, but I'm definitely not a crier or was not a crier, but literally since Fuel Ed, like I cried all the things, and being vulnerable and being courageous about that has served me really well in the last couple of years, and just being like that emotional intelligence. I thought I was emotionally intelligent, but I really wasn't because I was holding back a lot of my own emotions and how I led and how I was moving through the world. And so like that's been really different for me. The last two rather, around setting boundaries and investing in self. And again, I think those two things are connected. For me, it was hard to say no. I'm a middle child, school leader, like you do for everyone, and that has its place sometimes, but it's also important to set boundaries, and that was a hard lesson for me. I definitely thought relationships would break by setting boundaries instead of relationships being strengthened by like naming and clarifying that like for me to invest in myself and be a healthier person to other people, I've got to be able to like say no in ways that are self-protection. And I've been blessed to find people be, for the most part, really well receptive of that, but that was a difficult change for me to make in my life. The one other piece that's like kind of not in here around like clarifying your values and stuff, for me, I also had to think about my spiritual life and like how going to church was something that was definitely important and like nurturing to me, but like alongside a re-clarification of like my values and alignment to my purpose, that act of like going to church and being engaged spiritually has also looked different. And I've been increasingly appreciative of that, as like I feel like my faith and other parts of myself have grown by like merging things together instead of trying to keep them siloed or compartmentalized. So I just want to leave you with the 3 thoughts that I think could be helpful for everyone, not just for me, as I leave. So one is this Black men need therapy too. I say this not to like only Black men, but obviously like everyone needs someone who can be a safe, reflective space and like allow you to like listen to yourself and emote and recalibrate and realign. I did not have that. I thought my friends were doing that. I thought some of my coworkers were, but really like my attachment to them and my obligation to them stopped them from being as the healthy space that I needed. And so for me, I mean, I believe in therapy, but like it's not for everyone, but having that coach, that counselor, that someone who is differently invested in you to create that space for you to reflect on your relationship. And for me, really hearing myself enabled me to like make better decisions that were in alignment with my values, my purpose, and my needs. And to like have a space to like hear where white supremacy culture was like raising itself up, and me to be like, nope, like that's actually something else. Like that's not me, like that's not for me. And to reject those things when they reject those things, but I needed a space to like create that opportunity. So therapy has been that for me, but I know there are lots of ways for that to be met for other folks. But I appreciate Fuel Ed for opening me up to therapy, because without it, I think I would have been spinning my wheels. Yes, safe, non-judgmental, and unbiased. So much. You can go to the next slide. So like I share this like with all like acknowledgement that this may feel somewhat political, but like I think it's important to understand how white supremacy culture shows up at work. Some of the same things that I mentioned right here, but there are some other ones, and this is not about like anti-white people or anything like that. I think like some elements of these things can be really productive, but everything like has its limits, and understanding where it's being forced upon you versus something that feels good to you was really important to me. and this like impacts like my career like stuff now too, because like with the full embrace of white supremacy culture, an obsession around like perfection and like having power and hoarding power, and I'm the only one, like there was lots of, I think for me, some unhealthy, like I'm the only Black person in the room, and like that's a badge of honor in some way, and it's not, it's problematic, and like it's not serving me. But some of those mindsets I needed to confront and like and detach from, and like having the language around like where that comes from, and like was very important for me, and it helped me depart from like this rat race professionally where I gotta where I'm trying to achieve, and not settle and sit in what is like working well for me and creating a real sense of accomplishment and peace for myself. And so understanding like how those can be elements of white supremacy culture was helpful for me, because it detached people from it and helped me see like there's a system at play. How am I feeding into it? How am I contributing to it and enforcing these things on other people? Is that what I want to do? If not, then how do I function differently as a leader and also as an individual? And then the last thing that I will say is like getting to a place where you just kind of like let stuff flow. For me, I was like constantly forcing. And Fuel had helped to start like this process for me of being like, okay, you got to stop being in a rush to get somewhere and just be where you are. And as I've been able to like embody that, and again, like my authentic self like isn't someone who's actually trying to like get to the next thing all the time. Like that's not really who I am. And so through Brene Brown and other people and other opportunities, being like, well, like I'm not in a rush to achieve stuff. Like I feel pretty good about the stuff that I've achieved. Like whatever comes next just happens, has been hugely important for me, like as a person, as a professional, because now I'm able to receive whatever comes to me professionally with a lot more joy and different type of resentment. So even though I was with Jasmine and Grace, like I've been stressed, I'm like, oh, I got to get this done. And this morning it like flooded in Brooklyn, so we had to cancel school and like all this craziness and like COVID and like kids, all of that is like a ton of stress. But instead of like receiving that with like, and I got to like rush to get to this thing, and if I don't do this perfectly, then I'm not going to be an ED in a couple of years, and this is like, nope, just pause, and like whatever is coming to you is meant for you. Whatever leaves you is like isn't for you at that time and in the moment, and like then I can embrace what does come with a lot more joy and create a lot more space to be responsive to what happens to me versus reacting. And I think those two words are really different, and maybe I can explain it in a little bit, but that's where I've been, and like that's how Fuel has like helped me claim and identify my authentic self. So I appreciate you all sticking with me and participating in the chat. I hope this is helpful, but I know I'm also over time, so I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to hand it back over to Jasmine. Thank you guys so much.
You're great, Eldridge. There's no such thing as over time. You are just giving us so many gems. We're going to move into a question and answer space. I'm going to stop my screen so we can actually see our little group. It's such a rich group too. I'm so excited for the folks who are in the space tonight. Oh, that was so good. I literally have like all these questions that I write down for you. So I'll just come with a couple and we'll see how it flows. I also want to invite folks in the chat, just add any questions that come up for you about what Eldridge shared, or just things that are coming up from your own personal life, and we'll elevate those in this little Q&A moment before we go into breakout groups where y'all can all dig deeper. But first, just amazing. I love the vulnerability that you offered and the ways in which you really brought all facets of your life, right? And your identities, and even the things that are not, cookie cutter and easy to fit into a box, which I just really love. One thing I'm very curious about is, as you were kind of on this journey and bringing more of your whole self into work, how was that received? Like where were the challenging points or the harder moments? And yeah, like what did you notice in how your colleagues or peers or maybe folks who knew you kind of deep in the haze, like how they responded to those changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think big picture, I was like, it was all well received, but I think I got pushback from people who didn't know me well and like really weren't, and I think had their own definition of like what it looked like for me to be like in spaces and to lead. And so me taking my hands off or like, or functioning differently, like really jarred their own experiences. And so like, they were the most like, hey, like what's going on? Like, why are you doing this or that? Or like, at work a lot, it was like, it feels like you're loosening the reins, or like you're, what is like the right term, like getting soft, which is like a crazy concept to like use with kids, right? Because like, what is soft to like a child, as you're like trying to embrace them as they make mistakes and grow, and even adults. And so like, there was a lot of that like, I think as I was navigating it, I was like, I'm willing to explain this to an extent. And also like, this is an example of like why this maybe isn't my space anymore. So like that happened with some of my like direct reports and some people that I'd known for a while. And like my family too, like also like had a hard time as like set boundaries. My sisters were like, what? No, like that's not a thing. Like being more vocal about like my sexuality and like my desire to like have a partner and bring them to like Thanksgivings and things of that nature. Like it definitely took my parents like aback a little bit, because I never talked about those things before. Like when I was like suppressing stuff, like I was like not sharing like all of myself and like what I wanted to be true in life with a lot of people that I love very deeply. So I think it did take people aback, but I didn't feel rejection from anyone. But I did recognize that like reactions are indicators of whether or not I'm where I need to be anymore. And so again, like that led to me leaving my school that I loved, and left in like a great way, but it just wasn't for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that nuance, right, of being able to figure out where you're sort of engaging, coaching, like bringing people on board to kind of the fullness of who you are, and then realizing when you no longer fit, in the community or in the environment that you were before. It's like a consistent dance of, how much do I kind of bring you on board and kind of like get you up to speed with who I am, and then when is it time for me to find conditions where maybe I blossom or I flourish more fully. That kind of relates to what you were saying in the beginning. You mentioned you had the picture of two of the students at your current school, and just thinking about how your community, you said, is deeper and broader than you anticipated. And I'm just curious how coming into your own integrated whole self, like how that has impacted your ability to show up for students, or like the way that you view the work that you do.
I think it's definitely impacted kids in that what I emphasize with adults is different. So like as a school leader, and even like when I started out when I moved into this role of managing principals, it was much more like consistency. Like how are we doing things in a way that like maintain like a certain very specific like type of safety, like physical safety for kids, like all that kind of stuff. And it's broadened. Like this past year, I've spent a lot of time thinking about trauma and like how trauma shows up in our kids and in the adults. And like if you're a harmed adult, like if you're an adult reacting to or dealing with like trauma, particularly in COVID, then like you're passing that on to kids. So it's been like not just an expansion of like the littles, like the who's, but also like what I think is important for kids to experience, and how we as adults are obligated to provide that for them. And so I think the trauma work is probably the most salient. But I'd also say like me stepping into space and being like Black gay male president, like whatever, like that's been a really big space, like game changer for other queer people and queer people in all the organizations that I work with. Like it is, I mean, in the Bay, it feels pretty safe to be whoever you are, but like that's not always true. And like people don't always feel that. And me being able to step into that with like a different type of vulnerability has led to other people to recognize that that's important, and to and I think that's been a good thing. And that again like trickles down to kids. So then like, are we talking about like the number of like gendered bathrooms that we have, and like how do we get rid of that? Like knowing that again, like small things feel small to us, but because we're able to open up a certain type of conversation, then we're able to make things better for kids.
For sure, yeah, such good examples. It kind of makes me. Oh, you go. Finish.
Oh no, I was just thinking about like the last thing, and like it's interesting to be in a community that you create, and then without bitterness, not feel like you belong in that community anymore. And for me, recognizing like things move on and change and grow without me, and like that's a good thing. Like it doesn't have to be centered around me anymore. I think breaking that perspective around that community, that school, whatever, that I am somehow the center of it instead of like a contributor to it was transformational, and has allowed me to flow in and out of stuff, I think, in a more healthy way, because everything's not about me, and like that's a good thing, and I don't want everything to be about me.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like being able to show up as your whole self and advocate for those pieces, and also to acknowledge that there's so much diversity in the world. There's so many other perspectives, and like it's possible to just create containers and conditions for other people to show up full and whole. It doesn't have to always be that like you get it or you vibe with it or it's resonant for you. It's like, no, I can see that there are others who benefit from this tiny gesture and who might be able to show up as different kinds of leaders, different kinds of students, just by making that space open, which is really cool. I'm curious about, I guess this is kind of like my last question, but again, folks, feel free to add questions in the chat. We might even do like a little live Q&A moment as well, if we have the time. But I'm curious with the pandemic that we are currently in, it's continuing to go on and on. I'm curious, you know, now more than ever, in a way we see each other's wholeness because we're seeing each other's health, we're seeing each other's houses, we're seeing each other, you know, so much of people's lives, right? Like, it's like, oh, I see the art on your wall. And like, we see more of who people are holistically because of the conditions we're in. And yet, in a lot of ways, it seems as though work, school, like those cultures haven't necessarily shifted, right? In a lot of ways, some of the same things you were sort of speaking to about early in your career are still the expectations or the standards for what a leader is, or what it means to, like, you know, succeed or to be perfect or to, you know, get kids caught up. I'm curious for you, just any thoughts you have on that kind of contradiction, that dichotomy, and what you would love to see change as we're moving into this new phase in kind of human functioning as well as in education.
Yeah. I think, well, one is that like change takes time. Like we get into like these spaces, like as schools or like as a society, and we're like, oh, like this thing's really hard, it's going to change everything. And the reality is like change takes a really long time. Like it's not, stuff has to be in the water and embedded in people and in institutions. And one catastrophic set of things is like not going to be enough to like change the soil that like we're already kind of deep in. So like one thing I think about is like, how do you rejuvenate and like give yourself more patience and more time to like really see things change, and like how do you get stuff in the water so the conversation is gradually different. And so, you know, when I shared the slide around like white supremacy culture and things of that nature, it's so that like organizationally we get in the water, and our organization and other ones that I work with, we get some language in the water that will lead to like long-term changes. Like we got to talk about perfectionism if we want people to like not be crying in a corner when something's not perfect. Otherwise, like we kind of like, right, like we're not tending to like the root issue. We're like, you know, distracted by like this person's reaction or this or that. And it's like, no, like we got to talk about the right thing. And like, how do we make that conversation really easy to access day to day, time of time, regardless of like what happens like up top, can be a huge distraction. So there's that. And, you know, it's just a reminder that like we are more than happy as people and oriented to go like back to like what's easy and like what feels naturally to us, right? So with the pandemic, you know, we know kids are getting sick, families are scared, like all that stuff. But like as soon as it was like safe enough for us to like go back to regular, like we're back to regular school, there's like no remote learning anymore, like none of those things that we know were also helpful to like some kids, like helpful to like I had so many like middle school kids as a teacher and as a principal. I was like, if they could have just like done school at home, they would have been like a million times more successful. Like they did not need the added peer pressure of like, you know, all of this stuff like in middle school and high school, just like
wearing the right clothes, saying the right thing, like navigating. Right.
And as soon as we had the opportunity, like we stripped all of that away. And so how do we, right, like that's just who we are, because like that's easier, but also like how do we like not lose the reminders that like that stuff works for some people, and like and not lose the sense that like the reminder like it also like wasn't that hard to do. And like equity is providing everyone with what they need. It's like not just, you know, we've created that term, like not created, but like term is so much a part of our nomenclature, and like then we like abuse it and like completely misuse it. And so like that's kind of where my head has been, and like so let's just keep bringing it up, like we got to keep just bringing it up, like we can do this, it's possible, and it's better for some people, even if it's a small number. Isn't that worth it? Right? Is that one or two kids like experience worth it? Isn't it worth it for like that teacher? If we can do it, is it worth it? And like if we can, then we've got to.
I love that.
I don't know that I answered your question, but those are
no, I definitely hear you. I think it like I think it really resonates and builds this bridge between the leader or the educator and the student, and really seeing it all as one spectrum, all as one ecosystem. The more that you are able and feel like you have the conditions to embrace who you are, you can lead more authentically. And similarly, you can have more spaciousness to create those conditions for kids, right? So realizing like, oh, I'm the only, maybe I'm the only queer Black man on my staff. And that means I need these things, or I want to feel like I see these things in my work environment. Suddenly you have compassion for a kiddo who you're like, oh, right, you're the only, kid who's on the spectrum, who really needs these supports. But that doesn't become like, oh, that's just one of 30, because you're one of 30. And you're like, no, we both need that nuance and specific support and care and conditions in order to create a thriving environment, right? Where we can all bring our best selves, where that kiddo can like do great in school and you can thrive as a leader on your team. So I just love seeing that kind of connection and thinking about how do we take some of the findings from this really strange time and not just throw them all away in order to go back to like a homogenous reality, but actually use them to create a more customized, personalized, supportive experience for everyone who's involved in the school experience.
Yeah, and I really love that you said around like creating space for like analyzing where you are, create space for other people. And that's like so key to a lot of the trauma and healing stuff that I've been reading about recently. It's like, if you deal with your own stuff, like to a certain extent, you have this much more space for someone else. I mean, like what they're going through. And if you give them that much space, and like, what does that create for them? Like, that's where healing is. Healing is in like that little space that you have. And if you're that much more healed, you can help someone else on like their journey. And like, we owe that to kids and to families. And I really feel like that's also a part of like the Fuel-Ed experience, like that emotional intelligence. If you have that much more emotional intelligence, like if you're that much more aware of like attachment theory and like how we're building attachment to and like where you got, how you got there, your values, then you create a little bit more space for someone else to like have that same kind of knowledge. And it creates a safer, more satisfied, more full people.
I love it. So good. So good. Well, I want to make sure we have time to do some breakout connection because there's so much rich stuff that you just shared. So I'm going to screen share again to give a little context on those spaces. So we're a little mix and mingle sessions. We're going to do 2 breakout rooms so folks can kind of actually share and become off screen, go a little bit deeper into what resonated for them and just explore what's coming up. So you'll be invited into those breakout rooms. Again, if you, for whatever reason, don't want to be in one, you can let Grace know and we'll put you in a private space so you can have some self-reflection time. But we'll have 15 minutes to really do some self-reflection. So first, introduce yourself, kind of like we did. Where are you? Who are you? What are you doing? Maybe even just how you're doing today. We're all in different time zones, coming from really different days. Some of us dealing with flooding in our schools, some of us dealing with who knows what. And so just inviting you to kind of bring yourself and just for everyone to say, hey. And the second part will be these 2 questions that I want to pose to the group. And I'd love it if everybody in their space shared. It'd be really great to hear everybody's voice and then to kind of harvest what comes out of those conversations. But what barriers do you experience to being your authentic self at work? Like, what are things that make it really hard for you to show up fully as who you are in your leadership? And then what's one change you can make to begin exploring more wholeness in your work and professional life? So even if it's something super tiny, like, in my email signature, I'm gonna include this thing, or in meetings, I'm gonna make sure that I ask for whatever, this support. It'd be really cool to hear where you feel like there's challenges right now in bringing that wholeness, and then any ideas or thoughts that you have about how you could start even tomorrow, start integrating that wholeness into the work environment. And of course, anything else you want to discuss in those spaces is encouraged as well. So I'm going to pause there. Any questions before we break you off into 2 groups? Okay, cool. I'm going to have Grace do her magic and move y'all into two subgroups, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Awesome. Nice. Let's see here. Okay, I think everybody, I'll stop my share. Still have Andra. You're gonna break out, Andra? Is Andra still there, maybe? I'll chat Andra as well. Great work so far, Eldridge. Minutes here. Thanks, Grace. Awesome, 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 awesome. So good. Okay, I'll wait until we get our last two folks to return and then we'll hop into it. Pin you, Eldridge. Cool, cool, cool. Awesome. So welcome back, friends. I would love to just open it up. I'm kind of keeping these questions here as maybe a guiding source for us for the next couple of minutes, but feel free to share anything that stood out to you, what came up in terms of barriers to being, you know, a more authentic leader, and did anyone have any exciting ideas about how they can start to make those changes in their environment? Do we have any takers, any unmuters out there?
I will share.
Yes, we love it.
Apologies for my current state, but yes, Emily spoke a bit to just, again, like that, like hustle culture at school. Like you can't be real when you just have so much to do. And it's almost like there's no time to check in with yourself. There's no time to check in with other people. And that's the reality of schools. Like when you are lesson planning, and not only that, while it's so important to differentiate, you're lesson planning like 4 times to make sure that it meets the needs of so many other people. So the focus becomes so much on everybody else around you. And you know, especially for Emily's work, where she works with special ed students, it's so demanding of your person that it's really hard to center and even check in with yourself, let alone other people check in with you. And so I think that is just, it's so important that you focus on the students, that message, like it's about the students, but it can really wear you down.
Totally, yeah, it's a great reflection. I'm glad y'all had that time to share. Any other thoughts folks want to share before we close out the space together? No? Any sharers? See some smiles?
Okay, this is Gloria. Sorry, I'm driving still, but I want to. I can share. Like I share in my group, you know, like sometimes, you know, learning about the attachments, and I'm in the secure attachment, by the way. Sometimes it's hard to be yourself when you have different attachments, like the anxiety attachment, disorganized attachment. So then you have to, it's hard for me to be myself sometimes around people that have different attachment, because then I can be too strong, coming too strong to them. So I have to really reflect and say, how can I be different? And I mean, being myself without, you know, running it over, like, or making them feel offended. And so that is something of my barriers. So like I have to be very self-aware of my responses and my reactions, so I don't hurt I can know, so I don't get somebody else, you know, on the way.
Yeah, I hear you, Gloria. It's kind of that balance of like, how do I show up fully as myself, express who I am, and also realize that not everyone's like me, or some people are going to be offended by that, or they're going to be overwhelmed by it. Like, how do we coexist without compromising the fullness of who we are? I think that's the eternal work, right, of trying to be in diverse and unique spaces. I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Awesome. I'll close this out. If anyone has other thoughts, feel free to add them to the chat. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and just say that we would love your feedback. So Grace is going to chat out a survey to you right now. If you can just take, it's literally 1 minute, less than 1 minute if you want it to be, just about what you're thinking, how you're feeling, what stood out to you. That information is so useful as we keep designing these to really meet your needs and be customized to the folks who are showing up here again and again. So if you can just take 1 minute right now, it'd be so powerful, and also send it out right after this call so you have access to it if you want more time to luxuriate on your thoughts and your reflections. And I also want to invite you to check out our website, our events page, where we have more gatherings, more alumni offerings. If you've been to Fuel Ed's work before and you want to kind of have a processing space, we have an empathy circle happening next Thursday, and we have other events coming up, webinars with information, as well as other community gatherings. One happening next month with another alumni, Katie Wong, who's based in Tennessee. And so I just invite you to continue to stay involved and to sort of engage in these other spaces with folks who are seeking connection and seeking to grow and learn, just like you are. And finally, I just want to thank you for attending and again, encourage your feedback, but also really thank Eldridge for all the work you put into your presentation, the thoughtfulness, the reflection, and for really being an ambassador of this work in your life and just in the way that you live and how you show up, and just consistently coming back to community with your findings and with your learnings. It means so much to me, and I really think it's deeply meaningful and impactful to others in this space and in our community. So I appreciate you so much. And this recording will be available on YouTube in a few days. So you can come back to it, check it out, share it with your friends who couldn't be here. We want to keep spreading the word around these concepts and these pieces around self-awareness, which are so essential. So feel free. One thing we'll do, I enjoyed this a lot, and so I'm going to engage. We're going to do a little last word waterfall. So in your chat, you're not going to press send yet, but in your chat, you can put a word from how you're feeling as you're leaving the space. We'll all press send at the same time. So I'm going to put my word in the chat. And then we'll do a little send in a second when I say send. So put your word in. Okay, we're all typing. We've got our words percolating in the chat. And then when I say waterfall, we'll all press send at once, okay? So ready, set, waterfall. I love it. We have inspired, gratitude, dazzled, heart-warmed, encouraged, better. I love it. So good to hear. And I hope you'll have a beautiful night. I'm here if you need anything from me via email, and I'm excited to see you all soon. Bye.